All right, deep divers, get ready. We are diving deep, deep into ancient Greece today.
Ooh, ancient Greece.
But, and this is a big but,
Okay.
we're not just going to rehash the same old stories everyone's heard a million times.
Right.
We're going for the hidden gems, the unexpected connections, the stuff that makes you go, wait, what? They did that back then.
I love those moments. I mean, that's what makes history so fascinating, isn't it? Finding those echoes of the past in our present.
Totally. So we've got this incredible stack of sources.
Lay on me.
Everything from the very beginnings of Athenian democracy, how it actually worked, to the epic rivalry between Athens and Sparta.
Oh, classic. Always a good story there.
Oh, for sure. And then we get into the heavy hitters of philosophy. Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. Their ideas are still blowing minds centuries later.
Don't forget Alexander the Great, conquering most of the known world before he even hit 30. The guy was a legend.
Oh, right. Plus, we're going to delve into Homer's epics, the Iliad and the Odyssey. Those stories are just timeless.
Epic poetry, philosophy, military campaigns. Ancient Greece really had it all, didn't it?
Seriously. Okay, so where do we even begin with all this? Talk about a civilization that shaped the world.
Well, every good story has a beginning, right? Athens, the city we all think of when we hear democracy, actually started way back in the 8th century BC.
Wow, so way, way back.
Way back. Founded by the Ionian people. And let me tell you, it wasn't exactly a democracy right out of the gate.
Oh, really? I just assumed they invent democracy and we're good to go.
Haha. Nope, not quite. It was a long and complicated process. In the 6th century BC, we have this guy, Solon. Super smart lawmaker.
Okay.
And he realized that only the wealthy few were calling the shots, which, wasn't really working out for everyone else.
Yeah, makes sense.
So he made some reforms, trying to even the playing field a bit.
So a step towards democracy.
Exactly. But like any political system, there were always power struggles.
The drama.
Oh, yeah. Enter Pisistratus. This guy was ambitious, let's say.
Ambitious how?
Well, he basically became what the Greeks called a tyrant. Seized power, didn't really care about any legal claims. Not exactly a friend of democracy.
Wow. So a step backward.
You could say that, but sometimes those steps back can lead to even bigger leaps forward.
Ooh, I like where this is going.
Yeah, and that's where Cleisthenes comes in. This is 508 BC. He introduces this wild idea, ostracism.
Ostracism? Okay, you're going to have to explain that one.
So picture this. The citizens of Athens could vote to exile someone for 10 years.
Exile, kick them out of the city.
Gone. And not for committing a crime or anything like that.
Seriously, then what for?
For being too powerful, too influential, too popular.
Too popular. You could get exiled for being too popular.
Apparently, the idea was to prevent anyone from becoming too powerful, to stop another tyrant from taking over.
Wow, that makes you think though, right? About how we deal with people who gain a lot of influence today. It's kind of like cancel culture. In a way.
The parallels are definitely there. It makes you question, though, right? Is it ever right to silence someone just because they're popular? Where do you draw the line? It's a really interesting debate.
It is, and it shows how even back then, they were grappling with these complex questions about power, influence, and the will of the majority.
Exactly. And speaking of power struggles, we can't talk about ancient Greece without mentioning the ultimate rivalry.
Athens versus Sparta.
The clash of the titans. It's like two completely different worlds colliding. On one hand, you have Athens. Bustling democracy, art, philosophy, trade. They were all about open debate and individual expression.
Yeah, the free thinkers.
Right. And then you have Sparta. Super disciplined, militaristic society. Everything was about the state, about strength and obedience, individual desires. Not so important.
Yeah, I've read about the Spartan way of life. Super intense. Boys were trained for war from age 7.
Exactly. And they had this system of basically state-owned serfs called helots. Yeah. They were forced to work the land, basically supporting the whole Spartan system. Not exactly a recipe for social harmony.
No kidding. Sounds like a pretty volatile situation.
It was. I mean, how do you maintain a society based on freedom and military strength when you're relying on a system of forced labor? It's a fascinating contradiction.
Totally. So this clash of ideologies, all this tension, it eventually explodes, right?
It does. Enter the Peloponnesian War. Decades of conflict between Athens and Sparta, each leading their own alliance of city-states.
Wow. A whole generation caught in the middle of this war.
It reshaped the entire Greek world. Both Athens and Sparta were weakened, paving the way for a new power to emerge.
Okay, I'm sensing a plot twist.
A power from the north, Macedon. And that's where we meet Philip II, a king with big ambitions.
Ambitions, like
Just conquering all of Greece.
casual.
He was a brilliant strategist, super cunning. He saw that the Greek city-states were vulnerable after the war, and he just seized his moment.
Wow, talk about taking advantage of a power vacuum.
He did. And this, my friend, sets the stage for his son, Alexander the Great, the guy who would conquer most of the known world.
Okay, I'm hooked. But before we go full-on military campaign mode, we have to talk about the incredible cultural achievements of this period.
Yes. It's not all war and conquest. Ancient Greece was a hotbed of art, literature, and philosophy. We have Homer, Hesiod, the Sophists.
So much to unpack. Where do we even start with all this?
Well, let's start with a good story.
Love it.
Homer, the poet, the legend, the Iliad and the Odyssey. These epic tales weren't just stories. They were like windows into the soul of ancient Greece.
I remember reading the Odyssey in high school. It just transported me. The imagery, the characters, the whole epic scale of it all.
Exactly. They dealt with universal themes: war, heroism, love, fate, the power of the gods, the complexities of human nature. It's all there.
Timeless, really.
Totally. And then we have Hesiod, a poet who gives us a very different perspective.
How so?
His work, Works and Days, focuses on everyday life, the realities of farming, the ethics of hard work. It's a reminder that even in a world of gods and heroes, people still had to deal with the nitty-gritty of daily life.
So it's not all epic battles and grand adventures.
Nope. There's beauty in the mundane, too. But then we start to see a shift, a questioning of tradition with the Sophists.
The Sophists.
They were like these traveling teachers, these master debaters who challenged conventional wisdom.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
They emphasized rhetoric, the art of persuasion, over the pursuit of some absolute truth. They were all about winning arguments, making compelling cases, even if they didn't necessarily believe what they were saying.
So like ancient lawyers or politicians.
In a way. And
Yeah.
It makes you think, right? About how much of our world is shaped by persuasion, advertising, political campaigns, even just our everyday conversation.
It's true. We're constantly being bombarded with messages trying to influence our thinking.
Exactly. And the Sophists were masters of that game. They knew how to play with language, how to sway opinions, how to get people on their side.
Fascinating. But the Sophists weren't the only ones shaking things up. This is where we get into like the big leagues of philosophy. Socrates, Plato, Aristotle.
The titans of thought. And it all starts with Socrates, this enigmatic figure who just wandered around Athens asking everyone these deep, probing questions.
Yeah, I've heard he was kind of a gadfly, always challenging people's assumptions.
He was. He didn't write anything down, but his impact was huge. He believed in the power of dialogue, of questioning everything, of never taking anything for granted.
And his famous motto,
Know thyself. He emphasized the importance of self-awareness, of examining your own beliefs and values. Pretty radical stuff for the time.
it is. But all that questioning, all that challenging of authority, it got him into trouble, didn't it?
It did. He was put on trial, accused of corrupting the youth of Athens, and ultimately sentenced to death.
Wow, that's heavy. Talk about a martyr for free thought.
It was a tragic loss, but his legacy lived on through his student, Plato.
Plato, the one who wrote all those dialogues, right?
The very same. He took Socrates' ideas and developed them into this elaborate philosophical system. His most famous idea, the theory of forms.
Okay, I've heard of this, but I'm not sure I totally get it.
It's a bit mind-bending, but basically, Plato believed that the physical world we see around us is just a shadow of a higher realm of perfect eternal forms.
So like the things we see and touch are just imperfect copies of these ideal forms.
Exactly. Think of it like this. You see a beautiful tree. That tree is beautiful because it participates in the form of Buddhi, which exists in this higher realm. The form is like the blueprint, and the tree is like the copy.
Wow, okay. I think I'm starting to get it.
It's a pretty wild concept, and it had a huge impact on Western thought. It's like, how do we know what's real, what's true? Are we just chasing shadows? Plato was asking these big, fundamental questions.
Mind-blowing stuff. But then comes Aristotle, Plato's student, and he kind of takes things in a different direction.
He does. Aristotle was more a pragmatist. He was fascinated by the natural world, by observing and categorizing everything.
So while Plato was up in the clouds with his forms, Aristotle was down here on Earth getting his hands dirty.
Pretty much. He studied everything from plants and animals to politics and ethics. He was a polymath, a master of many disciplines.
A true Renaissance man, centuries before the Renaissance.
Exactly. And he gave us the tools of logic, the methods of scientific inquiry. His work laid the foundation for so much of our understanding of the world.
It's incredible to think about the impact these three guys had. Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. They were grappling with the same questions we still ask today. What is reality? What is a good life? What does it mean to be human?
And their ideas continue to shape our thinking, even after all this time. But we can't forget about another group of thinkers who shaped our understanding of ancient Greece. The historians.
Oh, right, the ones who chronicled all the wars and political dramas.
Exactly. We have Herodotus, often called the father of history. He wrote about the Persian Wars, this epic clash between East and West.
Okay, I vaguely remember something about that from history class.
Well, Herodotus' account is more than just a dry recitation of facts. He was a storyteller, weaving in myths and anecdotes to bring the past alive.
So like a historical novel, almost.
Kind of. He was trying to capture the spirit of the age, not just the events themselves.
That's cool. And then there's Thucydides, right? He wrote about the Peloponnesian War.
He did, and his approach was very different. He was more analytical, more focused on military strategy and political motivations.
So while Herodotus was all about the big picture, the human drama, Thucydides was more like, okay, here's how this war actually played out, move by move.
Exactly. And by comparing their approaches, we see that history is never just a neutral account of what happened.
Right, there's always a perspective, a bias, a way of framing the story.
It makes us think critically about the sources we rely on to understand the past. Whose voices are we hearing? Whose stories are being told? It's a constant process of interpretation.
And speaking of stories, we can't forget about the incredible playwrights of ancient Greece. These weren't just entertainment. They were exploring the depths of human experience.
Oh, absolutely. We're talking about Aeschylus, Sophocles, Euripides, the masters of tragedy.
Those names ring a bell, but I'm a bit rusty on the specifics.
Well, their plays were performed in these massive open-air theaters, and they dealt with these huge themes: justice, revenge, fate, free will, the whole spectrum of human emotion.
Wow, just imagine the spectacle of it all. The costumes, the masks, the chorus chanting. It must have been an incredibly powerful experience.
It was. And these plays weren't just entertainment. They were social commentary, exploring the big questions of the day. Think about Aeschylus's Agamemnon. It's a story about the cycle of violence, how one act of revenge leads to another. Still relevant today, unfortunately.
Yes. Sadly, some things never change.
Then there's Sophocles' Oedipus Rex. This is like the original psychological thriller. A man destined to fulfill a prophecy he desperately tries to avoid. Talk about a story that gets under your skin.
And Euripides.
His play Medea is a chilling tale of betrayal and revenge. A woman scorned by her husband takes some pretty drastic measures.
Sounds intense.
It is. But it's a reminder that these plays weren't afraid to explore the dark side of human nature. They were asking tough questions about morality, about justice, about the consequences of our actions.
It's amazing how these stories still resonate with us today, even after thousands of years.
They do. And we can't forget about comedy. Aristophanes was a master of satire. His play Lysistrata is hilarious and thought-provoking at the same time. The women of Greece are fed up with the endless war, so they decide to withhold sex from their husbands until they agree to make peace.
Wow, that's a bold strategy.
It is, and it shows how art can be a powerful tool for social change, for challenging the status quo.
Totally. But before we move on to the later periods of ancient Greece, let's take a step back to the very roots of their philosophy.
Ah, yes, the pre-Socratics. The ones who came before Socrates and laid the groundwork for his revolutionary ideas.
The OG deep thinkers.
Exactly. These were the philosophers trying to understand the nature of reality itself, like Thales, who believed that water was the fundamental element of everything.
Water. Interesting.
Right. Then you have Pythagoras, the math whiz, who is all about the power of numbers. He believed they held the key to understanding the universe.
Okay, that one I can kind of wrap my head around.
And of course, we have Heraclitus, the master of cryptic pronouncements, his famous line, "You cannot step into the same river twice." He was all about the constant flux of reality, the idea that everything is always changing.
Deep. I like it.
And then there's Democritus, who came up with this wild idea. He believed that all matter was made up of tiny, indivisible particles called atoms.
Wait, atoms? Like the stuff we learned about in chemistry class?
The very same. It took centuries for science to catch up to Democritus, but he was way ahead of his time.
That's mind-blowing, to think that these ancient Greeks were already exploring ideas that would form the basis of modern science.
It is. It shows their incredible intellectual curiosity, their willingness to challenge conventional wisdom and explore the unknown. And their ideas, no matter how outlandish they might have seemed at the time, planted the seeds for future scientific discoveries.
They were true pioneers. It's clear that ancient Greece was a time of incredible intellectual ferment, a period where people were asking big questions, challenging assumptions, and pushing the boundaries of knowledge in every direction.
Absolutely. And their legacy, their impact on our world is undeniable.
Okay, deep divers, back again. Still swimming through ancient Greece.
Yeah, and last time we were talking about Alexander the Great, right? Conquering a massive empire, spreading Greek culture like wildfire.
Yeah, it's like he totally changed the game. Opened up all these connections between East and West.
Exactly. It was a whole new era, the Hellenistic period, this incredible fusion of Greek and Eastern cultures. Art, philosophy, science, everything was getting remixed.
And in the middle of all that, we get these new philosophical schools popping up. Stoicism and Epicureanism.
Right. And they are very different from, like, the Socratic tradition.
Oh, yeah. How so?
Well, Stoicism was all about virtue, living in harmony with nature, mastering your own emotions.
So like inner peace over external stuff.
Exactly. For the Stoics, happiness wasn't about wealth or fame or any of that.
Except.
It was about inner strength, reason, duty.
Okay, I can see how that would be appealing, especially in a world that's, often pretty chaotic.
Totally. It's like you can't control what happens to you, but you can control how you react to it.
I like that. But what about Epicureanism? I always thought that was all about, like, indulging in pleasure.
It is, in a way, but not in the way you might think.
Okay, I'm listening.
So Epicurus, the founder, he believed that pleasure was the ultimate good.
Sounds good to me so far.
But he defined pleasure as the absence of pain, both physical and mental.
So not just, like, partying all the time.
Not exactly. It's more about, like, tranquility, a state of inner peace and contentment.
Ah, okay. So, like, avoiding things that cause you pain and anxiety.
Yeah. And surrounding yourself with good company, appreciating beauty, living a simple life.
I mean, that doesn't sound too bad.
Right. And for Epicureans, knowledge was key.
And knowledge is power.
Exactly. They thought that understanding the world, getting rid of fear and superstition was the path to true happiness.
It's interesting how these two schools, Stoicism and Epicureanism, both offer different paths to a good life.
Right. One's about mastering your inner world. The other's about finding harmony with the outer world.
Kind of like yin and yang.
And both of them had a huge impact on Roman thought, and you can still see their influence today.
Totally. Okay, so we've got philosophy covered.
Yeah.
But what about science? I remember you mentioning some pretty mind-blowing discoveries from this era.
Oh, yeah. The Hellenistic period was a golden age for science. Think about Aristarchus.
Refresh my memory.
He's the one who came up with the idea that the Earth revolves around the sun.
Wait, really? Back then?
Yep. Way ahead of his time. Everyone else thought the Earth was the center of the universe.
Well, that makes sense. It does kind of feel like we're the center of everything,
I know. But Aristarchus, he was like, nope, the sun's in charge here.
Talk about challenging the status quo.
He was a true visionary. But it took a long time for his ideas to catch on.
I bet. So, other scientific breakthroughs?
Oh, yeah. We have Euclid, the father of geometry.
Euclid. Oh, man. Flashbacks to high school math class.
But seriously, his book, The Elements, it's like the foundation of geometry. It's still used today, over 2,000 years later.
That's incredible to think about how these ancient ideas are still shaping our understanding of the world.
It is. And then there's Eratosthenes. He actually managed to calculate the circumference of the Earth.
No way. How did he even do that?
It's a brilliant story. He noticed that on the summer solstice at noon in Syene, the sun's rays shone straight down a well. No shadows.
Okay.
But at the same time, in Alexandria, further north, there were shadows.
Ah, so there's a difference in the angle of the sun's rays.
Exactly. And using that difference and some clever geometry, he was able to calculate the Earth's circumference with incredible accuracy.
That's amazing. Like, mind-bogglingly amazing.
It shows how much these ancient thinkers could achieve with just observation and reason.
It makes you wonder, what other incredible insights they had that have been lost to history.
I know, right? It's humbling.
Totally. So we've got philosophy, we've got science, we've got this incredible cultural fusion happening.
Ancient Greece really was a powerhouse of ideas and innovation.
Yeah. And I feel like we've only just scratched the surface.
There's so much more to explore.
Well, deep divers, are you ready for the final leg of our journey? Okay, deep divers, we're back for the final plunge into ancient Greece.
I know, it's kind of bittersweet, isn't it? Saying goodbye to this incredible civilization.
Yeah, but before we go, I really want to circle back to Athenian democracy.
Ah, yes, the birthplace of democracy.
We've touched on it throughout our deep dive, but I'd love to really get into the nitty-gritty of how it actually worked.
Yeah, good point. It was truly revolutionary for its time. Think about it. Citizens directly participating in decision-making.
No middlemen, no election.
Exactly. No electoral college, nothing like that. It was the people, the citizens themselves, gathering together to debate and vote on laws, policies.
Even war and peace.
Everything. It was a bold experiment in self-governance, and it's had a huge impact on, how we think about democracy even today.
So how did it actually work? Does everyone just show up and, shout their opinions?
Well, there were structures in place, of course. The main governing body was the assembly, called the ecclesia, and any adult male citizen could attend.
Okay, so far so good.
But, and this is a big but, citizenship was limited.
Limited out.
Only men, for one thing, and they had to be born to Athenian parents.
So not exactly the inclusive democracy we think of today.
Not quite. Women, slaves, foreigners, they were all excluded.
Right. A good reminder that even in ancient Athens, democracy was a work in progress.
For sure. But the fact that they were even trying to create a system where citizens had a direct say in government, that was radical.
Totally. So back to the assembly. How did they make decisions with, hundreds or even thousands of people all trying to have their say?
Well, they had this system called sortition.
Sortition? Sounds fancy.
It's basically like a random lottery. Citizens were selected by chance to serve on councils and committees.
Oh, interesting. So it wasn't just, the loudest voices dominating the conversation.
Exactly. It was a way to ensure that a broad range of perspectives were represented.
So they had direct democracy through the assembly, but they also had these councils and committees.
Right. And they also had elected officials, generals, magistrates, those kinds of positions.
So it was a mix of direct and representative democracy.
Yeah, you could say that. They were experimenting, trying to find the best way to govern themselves.
It makes you realize that democracy isn't just one thing. It's a constantly evolving process.
Exactly. It takes work, it takes vigilance, it takes a commitment to fairness and justice.
Well said. As we wrap up our deep dive into ancient Greece, I think it's clear that their legacy is all around us.
Absolutely. It's more than just the ruins and the artifacts.
It's the ideas, the art, the stories, the very way we think about the world.
Their impact on Western civilization is undeniable. Democracy, philosophy, science, literature. So much of what we value today has its roots in ancient Greece.
It's mind-blowing, really, when you stop and think about it.
It is, and it's a reminder that the past is never really past. It's always with us, shaping our present and our future.
Deep. I like it. Well, deep divers, thanks for joining us on this incredible journey through ancient Greece. We hope you've learned something new, been inspired by their achievements, and maybe even been challenged by their questions.
We'll see you next time for another deep dive into history.
Until then, keep exploring.